Greetings, friends of liberty. Imagining that being sequestered on this isle in the Atlantic, we've been driven to frequent madness. Some have called us English a nation of eccentrics. Now, while in general I would contest that claim, I must say that I did meet yet again yesterday a most odd fellow, a gentleman by the name of Joseph Ritson, who without question must be placed in the genus of eccentrics. Ritson, renowned for his violent literary criticism of Thomas Warton's History of English Poetry, subsequently attacked Samuel Johnson and George Stephens in most unrelenting tones as well, though truth be told, his criticisms are usually on the mark. But the oddness of it all is that this man Ritson follows a Pythagorean diet, which, while avoiding meat, is commonly held to render a man less, not more, violent. And yet, we see that Ritson, in avoiding the flesh of beast and fowl, has rendered himself among the most intemperate of men. By his own admission, his daily repast consists of bread, muffins, cheeses, cakes, butter, beer, ale, and milk. 'Tis clear enough the conclusion that living on such fare day in, day out will make any man unsettled. Furthermore, if we turn to your 21st century, we find no end of those also following a Pythagorean diet in the avoidance of eating animal flesh, while making, too, just like Joseph Ritson, numerous claims about its benefits for health, morality, and societal well-being. Perhaps most prominent of all these modern Pythagoreans is Princeton professor of philosophy Peter Singer. Singer, author of over a dozen books, has attempted yet again here to convince us of the benefits of veganism in this short 83-page book entitled Why Vegan?, published in 2020. Now, just as was the case with Ritson, who said that the use of animal food disposes man to cruel and ferocious actions, while he himself engaged in violent verbal fisticuffs, so too, more than 2 centuries later, we find, despite his book's size, a plethora of assertions by a Princeton philosopher. Let's take 20 to judge their validity. Assertion number 1. He begins on the very first page of his introduction by saying, people are shifting away from animal products because of 3 main concerns: animals, climate change, and their own health. Now, we'll get to the truth of these 3 reasons in due course, but first, we live in a world of almost 8 billion people, so no doubt some people are shifting away from animal products for these reasons. But is that the worldwide trend? No. Strictly with regard to the amount of worldwide meat consumption, we find that by checking the United Nations Food and Agricultural Organization data, the FAO, we see that in 2002, among a group of 163 countries, worldwide meat consumption was 47.11 kilograms per person per year, but that by 2020, 18 years later, it had increased to 48.17 kilograms per person. So an increase in meat consumption of 1.06 kilograms per person per year, or more than 2%. 109 countries increased their average meat consumption and 54 reduced it. So Singer's implication that the trend is going his way is false. The trend is against him. Assertion number 2. He says, of the 3 reasons I just mentioned, it was the first of these, animal cruelty, that led me to become a vegetarian in January 1971. Shortly before that, I had learned some facts about the way the animals I was eating were treated before they were killed. I talked about it with Renata, my wife. We could not justify supporting those practices through our purchases, so we stopped eating meat. Now, I don't doubt that this confession, that this was the reason that he and his wife gave up eating meat, is true. He gave up the practice of eating meat because he felt that by eating meat, he was supporting factory farming and unnecessary animal cruelty. Assertion number 3. He says, I am not, strictly speaking, an animal rights advocate because my views are not based on attributing rights to animals. The real problem here that he left out is whether he thinks human beings have any rights. If he does not, which it appears he doesn't, then he's putting animals and humans on the same plane as having the same degree of rights. None. And that would, of course, be bonkers. You can then forget John Locke, the United States Constitution, and the UN Declaration of Human Rights. Assertion number 4. He says, oysters, mussels, clams, and scallops are animals, to be more specific, bivalves, but they lack a central nervous system and a brain, so it is very unlikely that they can feel anything. I occasionally eat bivalves, which means that I am not completely vegetarian. This is true. He is not a strict vegetarian because for him, avoiding eating meat can only be justified by avoiding animal suffering. He also, incidentally, will eat eggs because he believes that the good but short lives enjoyed by the hens are better than no lives at all. Does this mean that we are, according to him, morally allowed to kill animals as long as they've had a pleasant life? He appears to agree, offering only technical objections in response, saying that we should find that to do so on anything like the scale of today's meat industry would be a sheer impossibility. Meat would become the prerogative of the rich. Assertion number 5. He says, some of the worst forms of factory farm confinement I described in the 1973 essay, Animal Liberation, are now illegal in the entire European Union, the United Kingdom, and in the state of California, as well as some other jurisdictions. That's true. He was ahead of the progressive curve here in some cases, but I would point out that modern California and the UK are hardly states to emulate with all their increasing problems. Quite the opposite. Assertion number 6. He says, this book is about the tyranny of human over non-human animals. This tyranny has caused, and today is still causing, an amount of pain and suffering that can only be compared with that which resulted from the centuries of tyranny by white humans over black humans. So he's surprisingly comparing the confinement and slaughter of chickens, pigs, and dairy cows with the tyrannical enslavement and murder of Africans. This clearly means that he regards humans as equivalent to chickens, pigs, and cattle. I would suggest that's quite an insult to all those former slaves. Chaining a cow in a dairy stall, for example, is much, much less egregious than chaining a human being. And I would add, of course, that if chaining a cow in a dairy stall produces a net positive for human beings, like tens of thousands of gallons of milk over the course of a lifetime, it's worth doing, because it makes human beings happy and well-fed. Assertion number 7. He claims that it's wrong to inflict needless suffering on another being. But the very point with animals is that it's not needless. There's no other way presently for human beings to obtain and achieve the great happiness that eating pulled pork, buffalo chicken wings, or filet mignon sautéed in rosemary butter brings. In addition, modern methods of factory farming have reduced the costs of pork, poultry, and beef products enormously over time. The price of chicken eggs, for example, has dropped from an inflation-adjusted $6.44 in 1937, inflation-adjusted, to just $1.84 in 2023. In other words, it dropped by 72% due to factory farming. And with these increased savings from a wide variety of products from factory farming, families can purchase many vital items of modern living. So his assertion that the suffering of animals is needless is utterly unjustified, either on the count of human culinary pleasure or savings. All those confined laying hens and broilers and porkers are suffering for a good cause: our eating pleasure and increased standard of living. Assertion number 8. I am no more outraged by the slaughter of horses or dogs for meat than I am by the slaughter of pigs for this purpose. What he's ignoring here is that if people unlike him slaughter their pets, i.e. their horses and dogs or cats, that indicates something unusual about them. Either they really need food or they're treating their pets as disposable. Assertion number 9. I have tried to avoid language which tends to degrade animals. That's true. He hasn't used terms like bird-brained, fat as a pig, porker, or whale to refer to humans. Assertion number 10. He claims that substituting other products, like soy products, for meat will help reduce the incidence of starvation, saying, millions of humans will benefit too. As I write, people are starving to death in many parts of the world, and many more are in imminent danger of starvation. This assertion is false, since A, most starvation is either caused by government, typical examples being the engineered famines of Soviet Russia and Red China, or B, by lack of modern agriculture. If human beings could have avoided starvation by raising soybeans instead of chickens or pigs, they would have already done so long ago. But the reality is, of course, that in developing countries, these animals are often raised on human waste or refuse. Not to get graphic, but in the same way with regard to fish, Dr. Singer may be interested to know that in parts of Asia, they put the outhouses right above the fish ponds. And when a person then engages in solid waste elimination, the fish can actually jump out of the water to grab their fair share as early as possible. I kid you not. In addition, the FAO has found that up to 70% of all agricultural land globally is rangeland that can only be utilized as grazing land for ruminant livestock, so it would be wasted anyway. Assertion number 11. He says, if possessing greater intelligence does not entitle one human to exploit another, why should it entitle animals to exploit non-humans? Because there are different kinds of creatures who can reason versus those who cannot. Singer is here making a category mistake. Assertion number 12. He says, if a being suffers, there can be no moral justification for refusing to take that suffering into consideration and indeed to count it equally. This leads him to the astonishing conclusion that the sufferings of humans are worth no more than the sufferings of field mice. In addition, if that's true, we should kill all the apex predators of the world since they cause a very unequal amount of suffering. So no lions, tigers, wolves, sharks, or eagles in his world. Assertion number 13. He says, insects are more difficult, and it may be that in our present state of knowledge, we must be agnostic about whether they are capable of suffering. That's true. It's hard to know whether a cockroach feels pain when we exterminate it. Assertion number 14. There can be no rational excuse for killing animals, be they killed for food, science, or sheer personal indulgence. So by this he means that there is no rational reason for using animals to test whether cancer drugs work, to investigate vital aspects of human biology, or to test for the poisonous effects of various foods, for example. This from a man who holds the Ira W. DeCamp Chair of Professional Bioethics at Princeton. He says in response to the obvious beneficialness of animal experimentation for humans, the only way to reply to this question is to pose another. Would the experimenter be prepared to experiment on a human orphan under 6 months old? So what he means by this is, since a 6 months old human infant has the same mental capacity, as let's say monkeys used in research, it should be morally allowable to experiment on neither or both. But again, this is a category mistake on his part. A human infant in actuality has rights and the monkey doesn't, because the human infant is a different type of being. And all this is asserted by the same man who said, what, for instance, are we to do about genuine conflicts of interest like rats biting slum children? I'm not sure of the answer. So again, our bioethicist doesn't know whether we're morally justified to use rat poison to kill rats if they're a threat to neighborhood children. Assertion number 15. He says, it was not libelous to describe McDonald's as McTorture because of the charge was substantially true. Here he refers to and discusses a famous case in the UK where McDonald's objected to the use of the words McTorture and McMurder in an activist pamphlet, then suing them for defamation. The judge on the case, however, eventually ruled in favor of the activists, deciding that in some circumstances with some animals, the description as torture was justified because the treatment of these animals was cruel by contemporary standards, which comes close enough to the word torture. I would agree that sometimes McDonald's may have treated the animals cruelly, although torture seems a stretch. In any case, the use of the word McMurder seems not justified since you can't murder animals. Assertion number 16. He says because of some Brazilian cattle ranchers in the Amazon clearing the rainforest, that the meat industry as a whole remains culpable for the loss of rainforest and for all the consequences of that, from global warming to the deaths of indigenous people fighting to defend their way of life. Is this true? First, with regard to indigenous people and cattle ranchers, one needs to apply property rights as the circumstances warrant. Secondly, research has shown that the annual deforestation of the Amazon region has been consistently and significantly declining, not increasing, since 2004. And B, that the world overall, given the increased CO2 in the atmosphere, is greening, meaning that the lungs of the world are actually in some respects getting larger. In addition, the Amazon is actually oxygen neutral, using as much as it produces. So contrary to his assertion, cattle ranching in the Amazon isn't a problem for the climate. Assertion number 17. He says, intensive animal production is a heavy user of fossil fuels and a major source of pollution of both air and water. It releases large quantities of methane and other greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. We are risking unpredictable changes to the climate of our planet. No, the reality is that serious climate researchers, like statistician Bjorn Lomborg, estimate that for any given human who goes vegan and gives up meat altogether, he will only reduce his net emissions by 2%. Other studies have shown that the methane released by cows is about 5% of global emissions, and in contrast to CO2 is broken down quickly in a couple of years, not creating a serious problem. Yet another study found that only 3.9% of all U.S. emissions were produced by animal agriculture. So in percentage terms, these likely aren't large quantities. Assertion number 18. He says, why are fish the forgotten victims on our plate? Is it because they are cold-blooded and covered in scales? Is it because they cannot give voice to their pain? Only an Ivy League bioethicist would worry about the silent screams of the fishes. Assertion number 19. He says, scientists tell us that keeping different animals in close, prolonged proximity with one another and with people creates an unhealthy environment that is the probable source of the mutation that enabled COVID-19 to infect humans. Well, the greater likelihood now seems to be that COVID was accidentally released from a certain lab in Wuhan. Assertion number 20. Remember how he claimed that your health would be adversely affected by eating animal-based products? The French, who live a very long time, would beg to differ, as would most doctors worldwide who understand that eating normal amounts of fish and meat can be entirely healthy and medically appropriate for most persons. So we find in the end that many of Singer's claims about the dangers of meat eating are, like Joseph Ritson's over 2 centuries ago, partially or entirely false. I'd give this book a C-D+, it being redeemed to a degree by Singer's very clear manner of writing and his provocative use of thoughtful, if incorrect, counterexamples. I shall now head straight to the kitchen to load up a plate with fresh slices of roast beef cooked this morning, along with biscuits, pickles, and some superb Dorset Blue Vinny cheese. I bid you well, and remain the Scarlet Pimpernel.